On today's show, we'll get to Patrick Kane signing with the Detroit Red Wings, the big trade board put up by Big Money CJ. We're going to get to all of the players on that and the fact that the top is very stacked with Calgary Flames players. But first, let's get to Corey Perry. The situation as it is right now, Corey Perry, his contract terminated. A press conference earlier this week, much talked about with Kyle Davidson, the Blackhawks GM, addressing Corey Perry and the unfortunate rumor that circulated as a result of all the speculation that came from last week's events. There's a lot to get to with Corey Perry. I would love to know your thoughts on where we're at right now with him no longer being on a team and the press conference as well, and anything else in terms of analysis you feel is relevant to bring up with the story, because there's a lot to unpack.
Well, it's pretty clear the situation put a pretty big strain on the organization, on Kyle Davidson himself personally. I mean, it was, he grew pretty emotional during that press conference, Julian, kind of blaming himself, I think, on some level. I mean, he was the one who brought in Corey Perry. A lot of talk, about him mentoring, a young team, and Connor Bedard specifically. And obviously, something's transpired here that crossed the line to the point where, you're now talking about a player that has probably a borderline Hall of Fame case, perhaps ending his career this way. I mean, we'll have to see if someone signs him, but I think the feeling inside the Blackhawks organization naturally is that they have to be above repute, given the, where they've been. It's a completely new management team in Chicago. Obviously, none of the players that were around, back in the era of the Kyle Beach situation are there. Stan Bowman lost his job. Joel Quenneville lost his job. He'd moved on to Florida. We know the fallout from that, but even in the wake of that, and many years later, I think the Blackhawks obviously are very sensitive to employee conduct and how everyone goes about their business. So, pretty stunning turn of events, I guess, for those on the outside, right? I mean, this all kind of unraveled quickly, from where Corey Perry took a morning skate before a game in Columbus last Wednesday, didn't play in that game. That was, when the organization, first learned, or at least Kyle Davidson learned of, what happened with Perry, and then they conducted their investigation. And, now I guess from the business end of it, Perry does have an option for 60 days here to grieve the decision to terminate his contract. But, even in that case, he would just be doing it to get the money back potentially, versus, it's not as though he's going to have to be reinstated on Chicago's roster. So yeah, it's a tough one. And it's a tough one to talk about too, of course, because we don't have full view into what went on here either.
Well, that's the next question I was going to bring up, because I know people are going to wonder about it. We know in the statement from the team, I'll read part of it here. The Chicago Blackhawks have determined that Corey Perry has engaged in conduct that is unacceptable and in violation of both the terms of his standard player's contract and the Blackhawks' internal policies intended to promote professional and safe work environments. And Kyle Davidson was straight up asked if there was any criminality to what had happened, and he just said it was just a workplace matter. How likely is it that we're ever going to figure out what Corey Perry did to be put in this situation?
I'd say it's unlikely we'll know the full extent of it ever, because I don't see a lot of reason. I mean, now kind of what's done is done. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's as you say, it's not a criminal act, so it's not something, at least the expectation from where I sit is that he's not going to be arrested or anything. So it's not anything that'll kind of go into the public record that way. Obviously the Blackhawks are moving on. I mean, they've terminated his contract. They're playing games now. They made a trade for Anthony Beauvillier to, try to bolster their forward group a little bit. And so that they're moving on. And I guess it would only be if Corey Perry felt the need to say something and address it at some point in time. And I don't have a lot of insight into, where he's at, if he could play again. I mean, remember his agent, Pat Morris, over the weekend released a statement saying that he had stepped away from the team to deal with a family matter, or personal matter, I believe that they called it. So, I'm not sure where he's at. So the truth is I don't think we will know. It was not by coincidence. I don't suspect that Kyle Davidson did brand it, though, a workplace matter. And really what this did is clearly violated, the Blackhawks code of conduct, if you want to call it, the rules by which if you work for that organization that everyone has to adhere to. And that's the foundation essentially for terminating his standard player contract that the team went ahead and did. So, if you look back over history, there's been a number of contracts that have been terminated. Everyone from Slava Voinov, Mike Richards back in the day, obviously Evander Kane more recently here in San Jose. In Kane's case, he did end up going on having a career, but in large part, when you've seen this happen, usually it's the end of the road for a player, because it's obviously pretty serious to get to a situation where your contract can be terminated.
How do you feel about how Chicago handled this entire situation from a PR standpoint? There's only so much we can say internally, but just from how they first brought up the situation, how they may have handled the rumor about Corey Perry. What are your thoughts on how Chicago handled this situation?
Well, I'm somewhat more sympathetic to them than I think the average person might be. I think sometimes when you're in the middle of something like this, it can be, first of all, they're dealing with the situation, right? Like the most important thing truly is is how they handle it. And by all accounts, it's hard to criticize. They learned of an incident that took place. They immediately removed Corey Perry from the team. They obviously did their investigation, and within days, his contract's been terminated. So, it does appear, again, with our limited knowledge of what occurred, that they took it very seriously and handled that well. I think managing the message could have been done a little bit better. And I'm sure that when they kind of go through their debrief, Kyle Davidson was saying he feels like he wears it, that there's, this awful rumor brings on life and obviously puts a lot of strain, I'm sure, on Connor Bedard and his family, given the nature of what was being said in some places. And, I think maybe they could have been a little more proactive right from the beginning and said that, Perry, I think they should have said more, because to me, it was the vacuum of information. That's what it got filled with other crap. And to be fair, there's like one main rumor, of course, and to the point that Kyle Davidson addressed it by saying, that whatever happened didn't involve any of the players on the team or members of their family. But there were lots of other rumors too, because there was so little information swirling about out there. And I think that made it, it took it to another level. Like, I'll tell you, I was taking the subway the other day in Toronto, and literally someone walked up to me who I don't know. And he's just like, did Corey Perry do it? And I don't even know what
That's
do it.
Insane.
But like, it felt like it. Obviously people do ask me stuff on the street sometimes, who the Leafs trading for or whatever. But like it sort of like reached a level of general consciousness. I don't think it would have, if maybe they could have been more forthright. Hindsight is 2020, right? Maybe they could have come out and said right away that he's dealing with a personal issue. But then, the counterpoint to that, because if they had said that on the first day, I don't think people would have dug into it as much, right? You would have been like, okay, I hope everything's okay there. But then, people might have suggested when they found out that he later gets his contract terminated, well, they were burying it at the start, right? Like I think it is kind of a lose-lose, because what they said is organizational decision right from the beginning, right? He's not with the team for the foreseeable future. Organizational decision. Like, they were making it clear without saying what he did, that this was their call, that they were on top of it, that they were weighing punishment, I think was implied. And then everyone was going to say, well, what would he be punished for? He just played this game here. And so I think it was a really tough spot for them. And I honestly think they handled it about as well as they could. I just think it's unfortunate that, I don't know what the lesson is here, because you can't come out and say on the first day, well, he did this thing, because they don't know, right? Like, they actually have to go through a process to figure out what happened and, probably talk to multiple parties and all that and weigh the information. And it's the middle of the season. Like, everyone, all the reporters that cover the team every day saw him take the morning skate in Columbus, and then all of a sudden he's a mystery scratch. The circumstances really were unfortunate, but I guess the truth is I think the more truth you can tell, the better. I'll give you another quick example. It's not a parallel in terms of what's going on, but I feel like there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there around John Klingberg with the Maple Leafs. And part of that, I think, as I reflect on it, is that, they didn't talk about his injury situation in the lead up to when he went away too much. Like, just all of a sudden he's gone. Right. But the more I've learned of that, he has been dealing with a hip issue for some time. He got injured in a game on October 19th. He's been trying to play through this injury, gamely. and it's not going well. And so then everyone's like, well, he's struggling and now they're making him disappear. It's like, no, it's just people didn't have the information all along. And so I think then people jump to conclusions, I guess. A lot of people do. And so I think the more honest you can be, the better, and as quickly as possible, because in a lot of these situations, there's nothing to hide. I mean, the only thing to hide in the Perry situation is to protect, anyone else that was involved in the situation that let his contract, be terminated. But they didn't have anything else to hide. They removed him from the team. They did their investigation. They terminated his contract. Anyway, it's unfortunate. And I don't know why these rumors start, where they start, but unfortunately, in the way information can move around these days, I think to some degree it's a little bit unavoidable.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack from that. I think a lot of
Sorry,
good
that was a long
made.
answer, but I mean, my
No,
brain's
that's fine.
going in every direction.
Totally understand. My thinking is like the particular rumor that we are discussing here. This is something that, like, I'm sure you had heard about for days. People on the ground in Chicago had heard about for days. The fact that it had gotten to a point where media people heard about it, like, it's not by accident that Chicago had to go out there and say, hey, this is not true. And the fact that it got to a point where it surfaced online and people ran with it, I consider that a failure on Chicago for not stopping that rumor a lot sooner. The fact that it got to a point where it was only this week where we saw some media outlets say that it was not true, and then other ones followed, and then Kyle Davidson has the press conference and says, okay, this is not true. I think they're way late in that process, first off. Two, I don't know if this is incorrect or correct or not. I just remembering from when we did the Athletic Hockey Show earlier this week and we had Mark Lazarus on, my understanding is that I don't think there were any reporters who were there on that Columbus trip because it was so close to Thanksgiving, which makes this so interesting. Yeah, that makes this fascinating for me, because if there was a reporter around, I'm curious if the situation had happened out there in the open for someone to see. My understanding is, and if it turns out I'm wrong, but you can go back to the Monday edition of that show when we had Mark Lazarus on. I believe he did say that there were no reporters who traveled on that specific part of the trip. So it doesn't seem as if like there was any reporter who would have been able to ask immediately, like, what's going on. It was a very strange situation from the get with that. I'm just going off of what we remember from the Monday show, but this was just such a strange situation, which only
right. So that's the Wednesday, and then it's Thursday's Thanksgiving, and then they're playing a Friday afternoon game at home against the Leafs on Black Friday, and he's not playing again, and so it's picking up steam, I guess. Maybe the weekend is when there was a chance, right? Kyle Davidson did meet reporters in Chicago on the weekend and really didn't say very much. Maybe there he could have said this is a workplace matter, something that would have deflected it away. But
the last thing I'll say about that too is just we can't forget about the fact that this is Chicago being implicated in all of this. If this is another organization that doesn't have the history with dealing with very serious situations, we probably look at this team and judge them very differently for how they handle this situation. I don't know if those same rumors spread, but the fact that it is Chicago and they have so much work to do to basically replace their image, which has been tarnished by this Kyle Beach situation, I think that plays into the criticism that's being thrown their way, and it is justly deserved on that part. There's a lot to unpack from that, but I wanted those points to be made.
And it was a preposterous rumor, though. Be better, people.
It was absolutely preposterous rumor. It was.
But let's move on. I don't want to give it any more life, but it was ridiculous.
We don't have to do that. I guess that's as much as we can cover on this particular situation.